The mining colony of New Haven had been quiet for 3 months when the sky changed color. Workers loading containers stopped their machines and pointed upward at the strange purple glow that spread across the atmosphere like spilled paint. Nobody had ever seen anything like it before. Admiral Patricia Wells received the emergency transmission while reviewing supply reports in her quarters aboard the battleship Defiance. The voice of Colony Director Robert Hayes crackled through. The static, his usual calm, completely gone. Purple light was washing over New Haven, and something massive was blocking out the stars. Patricia dropped her coffee mug and ran to the bridge. The main display showed what looked like a small moon hanging above New Haven. The object was perfectly smooth and dark, with lines of blue light running across its surface in geometric patterns. Patricia had commanded ships for 22 years and had never seen anything like it. Her communications officer turned to her with wide eyes and said the object was trying to make contact. The transmission came through in perfect English. A calm voice filled the bridge and spoke with the tone of someone reading a shopping list. It said that the Caliph Empire had arrived to claim this system for colonial development. All human inhabitants had 30 standard days to prepare for relocation to approved worlds. Resistance would be met with appropriate force. The transmission ended before anyone could respond. Patricia stared at the display for a full minute while her crew waited for orders. The object above New Haven was easily 10 times larger than their biggest battleship. Her tactical officer quietly reported that 6 more identical vessels had appeared throughout the system, positioned over every major colony and mining station. They had appeared without warning and without any sign of engines or propulsion systems. 3 hours later, a smaller craft detached from the massive ship above New Haven. Patricia watched through her scope as it approached the Defiance with smooth, silent movement. The alien vessel was sleek and white, about the size of a shuttle, but shaped like a teardrop. It requested permission to dock and Patricia granted it, though every instinct told her this was a mistake. The alien who stepped out of the craft looked almost human except for the gray skin and eyes that were completely black. He wore a simple blue uniform and carried no visible weapons. He introduced himself as Commander Thane and spoke as if he was delivering a business proposal rather than a conquest ultimatum. Patricia led him to the conference room where her senior officers were waiting. Commander Thane explained that the Caliph Empire had been expanding across the galaxy for over 3,000 years. They had successfully relocated 47 species to suitable worlds, where those species could continue their development under Caliph guidance. Humans would be relocated to a world called Haven 7, which had been prepared with appropriate atmosphere and resources. The transition would be smooth and beneficial for all parties involved. Captain Ray Foster, Patricia's tactical officer, asked what would happen if humans refused to leave. Commander Thane looked at him with what might have been confusion and said that refusal was not logical. The Caliph possessed technology that made resistance impossible. He gestured to a small device on his wrist and the lights in the conference room dimmed, then brightened again. He had interfaced with their systems without touching anything to demonstrate Caliph capabilities. Commander Thane requested permission to conduct a small test. Patricia agreed, curious to see what they were dealing with. The alien spoke quietly into his wrist device, and seconds later the Defiance shuddered. Every system on the ship shut down for exactly 10 seconds before coming back online. The engine core, weapons, life support, and communications had all been disabled and restored with casual ease. Commander Thane explained that this was merely a system override, not an attack. Caliph weapons could disable any human technology, permanently or destroy it entirely. He had reviewed human military capabilities and found them adequate for a primitive species but completely unable to threaten Caliph forces. The demonstration was meant to prevent unnecessary casualties that would result from futile resistance. Patricia asked why the Caliph wanted human worlds when the galaxy was full of empty planets. Commander Thane said that human colonies were located in systems with valuable resources and strategic positions. The worlds were already partially developed, which saved the Caliph considerable time and effort. Relocating the current inhabitants was more efficient than finding and developing new worlds. The alien also mentioned that humans would benefit from Kalith guidance. They had helped other species develop better technology, eliminate disease, and expand beyond their original worlds. Humanity would eventually become a valuable part of the Kalith Empire with full rights and representation. This was an opportunity, not a conquest? Captain Foster asked to see one of the relocation worlds. Commander Thane activated a holographic display that showed Haven 7, a green world with blue oceans and white clouds. Cities had been built to accommodate human needs, and the population could be expanded to several billion over time. Everything had been prepared for human arrival, including familiar food sources and recreational areas. Patricia studied the display and had to admit, it looked like a paradise compared to the harsh mining colonies and crowded space stations where most humans lived. But something about the presentation bothered her. She asked how many other species currently lived on relocation worlds and how many had chosen to return to their original homes. Commander Thane paused for the first time during the meeting. He said that relocated species typically chose to remain on their assigned worlds because they were superior to their original homes. Return migration was rare and generally not encouraged because it disrupted established colonial systems. When Patricia pressed for specific numbers, the alien said that information was not relevant to current negotiations. The meeting ended with Commander Thane returning to his ship after giving Patricia a communication device to coordinate the relocation process. He reminded her that 30 days was a generous time frame and that cooperation would ensure a smooth transition. Patricia watched his craft disappear into the massive ship above New Haven and felt a cold certainty settle in her stomach. She called an emergency meeting of all colonial defense commanders within communication range. 12 captains appeared on her display screen within an hour, all of them with the same grim expression. Patricia looked at each face and said what they were all thinking. The Kalith had made one critical error in their assessment of human capabilities. They had assumed that superior technology would automatically lead to surrender. Patricia smiled grimly as she began issuing orders to her commanders. The aliens were about to learn that humans had never been particularly good at following orders, especially from uninvited guests who wanted to take their homes. Dr. Ann Miller had been studying the disabled 8th probe for 18 hours straight when she made her first breakthrough. The alien device had crash-landed on New Haven after a mining explosion damaged it, and Ann was the only Zeta technology specialist within 3 systems. Her laboratory looked like a disaster zone with cables and components scattered everywhere, but she had finally found something useful. The probe used a form of energy manipulation that human science barely understood, but the power source was surprisingly simple. Anne stared at the readings on her scanner and laughed out loud for the first time in days. The Kalith technology was incredibly advanced, but it relied on the same basic physical principles that governed human technology. That meant it could be disrupted, damaged, or even destroyed with the right approach. Captain Ray Foster arrived at her laboratory just as Anne was connecting a human power cell to the alien device. He had been coordinating defense preparations across the system and looked like he hadn't slept in a week, and showed him her discovery with the excitement of a child showing off a new toy. The Kalith technology could be overloaded by feeding it too much power through the wrong channels. Ray watched as Anne demonstrated her technique on a small piece of the probe. She connected 3 human power cells in series and fed the energy into what looked like a sensor array. The alien component glowed brightly for several seconds before exploding in a shower of sparks. Anne grinned and said she had just figured out how to make Kalith technology commit suicide. The implications were staggering. If they could overload small components, they might be able to do the same thing to larger systems. Ray immediately contacted Admiral Patricia Wells to report the discovery. Patricia listened to the explanation and then asked the question they were all thinking. Could they scale up the technique to work on Kalith ships? And said it was theoretically possible, but would require massive amounts of power and a way to get close enough to make contact with the target vessel. The Kalith ships were heavily shielded, and their energy signatures suggested they could absorb enormous amounts of punishment. But every system had limits. and Anne was confident she could find those limits given enough time and resources. Patricia gave her unlimited access to every power source in the system and told her to work as fast as possible. They had been observing the Callus ships for 3 days, and the aliens showed no signs of moving to enforce their ultimatum. Either they were supremely confident in their superiority or they were waiting for something. Neither possibility was comforting. Meanwhile, Ray had been studying the tactical situation from every angle. Traditional space combat was impossible against an enemy that could disable human ships at will, but the Callus seemed to rely entirely on their technological advantage, which suggested they had limited experience with unconventional tactics. Ray began developing plans that abandoned every rule of civilized warfare. The first test came when a Callus patrol craft approached the mining station at Omega Point. The station's commander had ignored several warnings from Commander Thane and continued normal operations despite the relocation order. Ray watched from the Defiance as the alien ship positioned itself above the station and began scanning operations. Ray had spent 2 days preparing for this moment. The mining station was equipped with industrial or processors that could be converted into kinetic weapons with minor modifications. As the Callus ship completed its scan, 20-ton chunks of refined metal began launching from the station at maximum velocity. The aliens had plenty of time to dodge or defend, but they seemed stunned that humans would actually attack. The first projectile missed the Callus ship by several hundred meters. The second one clipped the edge of their hull and sent the vessel spinning out of control. The third projectile, loaded with conventional explosives, struck dead center and turned the alien craft into expanding debris. Ray felt a surge of savage satisfaction as he watched the wreckage scatter across space. Commander Thane's response came within minutes. His voice over the communication system was no longer calm and businesslike. He demanded to know why humans had committed an act of war against a peaceful relocation mission. Patricia replied that humans had not agreed to any relocation and considered the Callus presence an invasion. Any attempt to enforce the ultimatum would be met with appropriate resistance. The second demonstration came 3 hours later when another Callus ship approached the agricultural colony at Green Valley. This time, Ray had prepared something more sophisticated. The colony's food processing plants had been converted into manufacturing centers for proximity mines. As the alien ship descended toward the surface, it flew directly into a cloud of small explosive devices that had been disguised as agricultural drones. The Callus ship survived the attack but suffered significant damage to its hull and propulsion systems. More importantly, the aliens began to understand that humans were willing to sacrifice their own infrastructure to inflict casualties. The food processing plants were destroyed in the explosion, which meant the colony would face starvation within months. But the colonists had voted unanimously to make the sacrifice rather than submit to relocation. Dr. Ann Miller achieved her next breakthrough while analyzing debris from the destroyed Callus patrol craft. The alien hull material was incredibly strong but became brittle when exposed to specific electromagnetic frequencies, and immediately began designing weapons that could exploit this weakness. If they could generate the right frequency at sufficient power, they might be able to crack open the largest TLF ships. Ray coordinated the implementation of Anne's discovery across the entire system. Every human ship, station, and colony began modifying their communication arrays to broadcast on the frequency that weakened Callus hull material. The modification required most of their available power, which left them vulnerable to conventional attacks. But it also gave them the ability to damage previously invulnerable targets. The strategy faced its first major test when Commander Thane decided to make an example of New Haven Colony. His massive ship descended through the atmosphere while broadcasting warnings for all humans to evacuate immediately. The colony had 6 hours to comply before the Callus would begin forced relocation procedures using methods that might result in casualties. Patricia coordinated the defense from the Defiance while Anne worked frantically to complete her latest weapon design. Ray had positioned every available ship around New Haven, but their combined firepower was insignificant compared to the Callus mothership. The plan relied entirely on Anne's ability to find and exploit weaknesses in alien technology. As commander, Thane's ship reached the lower atmosphere. Every human vessel and ground installation began broadcasting Anne's frequency at maximum power. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Cracks appeared along the hull of the callous ship, and several sections began venting atmosphere. The massive vessel shuddered and began losing altitude much faster than intended, but the alien ship was too large and too well constructed to be destroyed by frequency weapons alone. Commander Thane managed to stabilize his vessel and began returning fire with energy beams that tore through human defenses like paper. Ray watched two of his destroyers vaporize in seconds and knew they needed a different approach. The solution came from an unexpected source. Tom Bradley, the chief engineer at New Haven's mining operation, had been listening to the battle reports and contacted Ray with a desperate suggestion. The colony's fusion power plant could be overloaded to create a massive explosion, but someone would need to keep it running until the Caliph ship was directly overhead. Patricia made the decision without hesitation. She ordered the evacuation of New Haven while Tom and a volunteer crew remained behind to prepare the power plant. As Commander Thane's damaged ship limped toward the surface, the humans below were turning their own colony into the largest bomb in system history. The explosion could be seen from orbit. New Haven colony vanished in a brilliant flash that temporarily blinded sensors across the system. When the light faded, Commander Thane's mothership was gone, reduced to scattered debris falling through the atmosphere like metallic rain. Patricia stared at the expanding shockwave and felt a mixture of triumph and horror. They had proven that humans could fight back against superior technology, but the cost was everything they had been trying to protect. New Haven had been home to 50,000 people, and now it was a radioactive crater. Commander Thane survived the explosion in an escape pod and was picked up by another Caliph vessel. His first transmission to the human fleet contained none of his previous calm confidence. He demanded to know why humans would destroy their own colonies rather than accept peaceful relocation. Patricia's response was simple and direct. Humans would rather die fighting than live as prisoners, regardless of how comfortable their cages might be. The Caliph had assumed that superior technology would automatically lead to surrender, but they had misunderstood something fundamental about human nature. Humans were too stubborn to know when they were beaten, and too creative in their violence. To make conquest practical, the war had officially begun. The aliens desired a colony, they got a war. Part 3. General Krell had conquered 17 species across 43 worlds, and none of them had ever made war the way humans did. The briefing room aboard his flagship contained detailed reports from every battle the Caliph had fought in the past 6 months, and every single report described tactics that violated basic principles of civilized warfare. Humans fought like wild animals with the intelligence to build weapons. The latest incident report described an attack on a supply convoy near the edge of human space. 3 human cargo ships had approached under the pretense of surrendering and requesting safe passage to relocation worlds. When the Caliph escort vessels moved in to accept the surrender, all 3 human ships had detonated simultaneously. The explosions destroyed 2 Caliph cruisers and damaged a third, so badly it required complete reconstruction. What disturbed General Krell most was not the kamikaze attack itself, but the fact that the human ships had contained actual refugees. Families with children had volunteered to die in order to destroy a few enemy vessels. The Caliph had encountered desperate species before, but never one willing to sacrifice their own civilians as weapons of war. Commander Thane entered the briefing room with fresh scars across his face and a mechanical replacement for his left arm. The human frequency weapons had nearly killed him during the New Haven incident, and he had been requesting permission to use extreme measures against human colonies ever since. General Krell gestured for him to take a seat and activated the holographic display. The tactical situation map showed the current state of the war across 12 systems. Red icons marked human colonies and defensive positions, while blue icons showed Caliph forces. What should have been a simple occupation had turned into a grinding campaign that consumed resources faster than the Caliph could replace them. Every day brought new reports of supply convoys destroyed, patrol ships missing, and installations damaged by human sabotage. General Krell pointed to a cluster of red icons near the mining system of Kepler 442. Intelligence reports indicated that humans were building something large in the asteroid field, using industrial equipment salvaged from abandoned colonies. Reconnaissance flights had been unable to get close enough for detailed scans because the entire area was surrounded by automated weapons platforms that fired on anything that approached. The mystery was solved when Engineer Tom Bradley sent a message directly to General Krell's flagship. The communication was broadcast on all frequencies and showed a human standing in what appeared to be a massive construction facility built inside a hollowed-out asteroid. Tom explained that humans had been studying captured Caliph technology and had discovered something interesting about their energy shields. Tom held up a device that looked like a standard Caliph power cell connected to human electronics with crude wiring. He explained that Caliph energy shields were designed to deflect coherent energy beams and high-velocity projectiles, but they had a fatal weakness. The shields could not stop objects that matched their exact resonance frequency. Tom smiled at the camera and said that humans had spent 3 months building a very large object that resonated at exactly the right frequency. The transmission ended with Tom triggering his device. The asteroid facility around him began to move, revealing itself to be a massive kinetic projectile aimed directly at General Krell's flagship. The asteroid-sized weapon accelerated slowly but steadily, guided by simple thrusters and programmed to home in on the largest Caliph energy signature in the system. General Krell ordered his fleet to scatter while calculating intercept trajectories for the approaching weapon. His ships could easily outrun the slow-moving asteroid, but that was not the point. Tom Bradley had just demonstrated that humans could turn any asteroid into a guided missile capable of destroying the largest Caliph vessels. Every asteroid field in human space was now a potential weapons factory. The psychological impact was immediate. Caliph crews began reporting stress reactions and requests for transfer to other fronts. Fighting an enemy that could turn their own planets into weapons was beyond anything in their training manuals. General Krell found himself dealing with discipline problems and morale issues that he had never encountered in his previous campaigns. The situation became worse when humans began capturing Caliph vessels intact. The first successful capture occurred when a damaged Caliph destroyer was forced to land on the mining world of Titan's Edge for emergency repairs. The human colonists surrounded the ship and demanded surrender, threatening to detonate mining charges that would destroy everyone within a 5-kilometer radius. Captain Ray Foster arrived at Titan's Edge 12 hours later to find the Caliph crew being held prisoner while human engineers crawled over their ship with cutting tools and scanning equipment. The aliens looked stunned that humans would risk mutual destruction to capture a single vessel. Ray interviewed the prisoners and discovered something that changed his entire understanding of Caliph psychology. The captured aliens kept asking when they would be released and returned to their own forces. The concept of permanent captivity or execution seemed completely foreign to them. Ray realized that the Caliph had never fought a war where prisoners were not exchanged according to established protocols. Their entire military doctrine was based on civilized rules of engagement that humans had never agreed to follow. Dr. Ann Miller made her next breakthrough while examining the captured Caliph destroyer. Instead of trying to understand the incomprehensible alien technology, she focused on finding ways to use it against its creators. The ship's navigation system contained detailed maps of Caliph space and the locations of their major installations. More importantly, the communication system could be used to send false messages to other Caliph vessels. Anne's plan was elegantly simple. She would use the captured ship's communication array to send fake distress signals that would lure other Caliph vessels into prepared ambush. The aliens would respond to save their comrades and find themselves facing human forces that had been given advance warning and preparation time. The first test of this strategy occurred near the gas giant Kronos, where a Caliph research station was conducting surveys of potential mining sites. and broadcast a distress signal indicating that the captured destroyer was under attack by human forces and required immediate assistance. 3 Caliph cruisers responded within hours, arriving to find the destroyer apparently adrift and broadcasting emergency beacons. As the rescue ships moved in to assist, human forces emerged from concealment behind Kronos' moons. The ambush included everything from converted mining ships to improvised weapons platforms built from salvaged equipment. The Caliph vessels found themselves caught in crossfire from multiple directions, while their sensors were jammed by the captured destroyer's own electronic warfare systems. 2 of the 3 Caliph cruisers were destroyed in the first minutes of combat. The third managed to escape, but not before suffering severe damage and losing most of its crew. General Krell received the battle report 6 hours later and realized that his forces were being systematically hunted using their own technology. Against them, the war began to spread beyond human space when other species learned about the ongoing conflict. The Caliph Empire ruled over dozens of subjugated races, most of whom had accepted relocation and integration centuries ago. But news of human resistance began reaching these subject peoples through smuggled communications and refugee reports. The first species to join the rebellion were the Builders, a collective intelligence that had been relocated to industrial worlds where they were forced to construct Caliph infrastructure. The Builders had accepted their fate for 300 years, but the example of human defiance inspired them to sabotage their own work. Critical components began failing throughout Caliph space as the Builders introduced subtle flaws into everything. They were ordered to build the Seekers, a peaceful research species, began sharing intelligence about Caliph military capabilities with human forces. Their detailed knowledge of alien technology helped Dr. Ann Miller develop more effective weapons and countermeasures. The Seekers had been studying their captors for centuries, waiting for an opportunity to strike back. Even some Caliph subject races began questioning their loyalty to the Empire. Species that had been integrated into Caliph society as junior partners started experiencing doubts about the righteousness of conquest. Reports filtered back to General Krell about minor uprisings and resistance movements spreading across previously stable worlds. The final blow came when humans managed to capture a Caliph command vessel intact. The operation required sacrificing an entire space station and its crew, but the intelligence gained was worth the cost. The captured ship contained complete strategic plans for the occupation of human space and detailed information about Caliph military capabilities. Captain Ray Foster studied the captured data and discovered that the Caliph Empire was not as strong as it appeared. Their forces were spread thin across dozens of systems, and they relied heavily on the psychological impact of their superior technology to maintain control. The Empire had never faced a prolonged insurgency and lacked the resources to fight extended campaigns on multiple fronts. More importantly, the captured data revealed that the Caliph High Command was growing concerned about the economic cost of the human war. The conflict was consuming resources faster than conquered territory could provide, and the spreading rebellion was threatening established colonies throughout the Empire. Some Caliph leaders were beginning to question whether human space was worth the price they were paying. General Krell received new orders from the High Command: end the human resistance quickly and decisively, or recommend alternative strategies for dealing with the problem. The Empire could not afford to maintain the current level of military commitment indefinitely. Success was no longer measured in territory conquered, but in resources preserved. The war was entering a new phase where victory would go to whoever could endure the longest. The Caliph had superior technology and numerical advantages, but humans had something the aliens had never encountered before: the willingness to pay any price to avoid surrender. General Krell stared at his strategic displays and realized he was facing an enemy that would rather destroy everything than submit to conquest. The question was no longer whether the Caliph could defeat humanity, but whether they could afford to win. Lieutenant Colonel Beth Rodriguez had never expected to command alien troops, but war had a way of creating impossible situations. Her tactical Briefing room aboard the converted freighter Phoenix contained representatives from 6 different species, all of them united by their hatred of Caliph rule. The mixed fleet under her command looked like something from a salvage yard, but it had become the most feared raiding force in 3 sectors. The latest intelligence reports spread across. Her table showed Caliph's supply routes throughout the outer rim territories. Red lines marked convoy paths while blue circles indicated defended positions. Beth traced her finger along a particularly vulnerable shipping lane that connected 5 major Caliph installations. The route was heavily trafficked but lightly defended, which made it perfect for the kind of hit-and-run tactics her mixed force specialized in. Commander Vel of the Seekers pointed to a junction where 3 shipping routes converged near the gas giant Helix 7. His species had been studying Caliph logistics for centuries and understood their supply systems better than anyone. Vel explained that destroying the automated depot at that location would force convoys to take longer routes through more dangerous space, increasing their vulnerability to attack. The plan required precise coordination between species that had been enemies just months ago. Builder drone ships would create the initial distraction by attacking the depot's defenses. Seeker vessels would jam communications to prevent calls for reinforcement. Human ships would provide the main assault force while the reformed Caliph subjects would handle evacuation and salvage operations. Beth studied the faces around her table and marveled at how quickly alliances could form when survival was at stake. The builders communicated through harmonic frequencies that required translation devices. The Seekers thought in mathematical concepts that human minds could barely comprehend. The reformed Caliph subjects spoke in ancient dialects that their own empire had tried to suppress. But they all understood the tactical situation perfectly. The attack began at 0400 station time, when builder drones emerged from hyperspace and immediately began destroying the outer sensor arrays around Helix 7. The automated defenses responded according to their programming, focusing all firepower on the most obvious threats while ignoring smaller vessels that registered as civilian traffic. The Caliph had programmed their systems to expect conventional attacks from predictable directions. Beth watched from the Phoenix as Seeker ships deployed their jamming arrays in perfect formation. The elegant alien vessels moved like a school of fish, each one responding to subtle changes in the other's positions. Within minutes, all communication between the depot and the outside galaxy had been severed. The installation was completely isolated and unaware that a major attack force was approaching from the opposite direction the main assault came from. Human vessels that had been disguised as commercial freighters. Beth led 12 ships through the asteroid field surrounding Helix 7, using the natural cover to approach within weapons range before revealing their true nature. The converted cargo haulers opened up with every weapon they could mount, pouring kinetic projectiles and improvised missiles into the depot's main structures. The Caliph defense platforms responded immediately, but their targeting systems had been designed to engage proper military vessels with predictable weapon signatures. The improvised human arsenal created sensor readings that confused the automated systems. Missiles built from mining charges registered as industrial accidents rather than weapons. Kinetic projectiles accelerated by modified cargo launchers appeared to be debris from construction projects. By the time the depot's artificial intelligence realized it was under coordinated attack, half of its defensive systems had been destroyed by weapons it had failed to recognize as threats. The remaining platforms fought back desperately, but they were outnumbered and outmaneuvered by ships that refused to follow standard combat protocols. The reformed Caliph subjects proved their worth during the final phase of the attack. 3. Ships crewed by former Empire loyalists used their knowledge of Caliph security codes to infiltrate the depot's computer systems. They downloaded critical intelligence about future convoy schedules and military deployments before triggering a complete system shutdown that left the installation helpless. Beth coordinated the salvage operation while keeping watch for Caliph reinforcements. Her mixed fleet had exactly 47 minutes to strip everything useful from the depot before enemy ships arrived. The builders worked with mechanical precision to dismantle valuable equipment. The Seekers identified the most critical components to prioritize. Human crews handled the explosive demolition of anything too large to carry away. The depot was reduced to expanding debris by the time the first Caliph patrol ships arrived. Beth's fleet had already scattered into hyperspace, leaving behind only wreckage and a message broadcast on all frequencies. The transmission contained footage of the mixed species crews working together, along with a simple statement that the rebellion was growing stronger every day. General Krell received the battle report 12 hours later while dealing with 3 other crisis situations. The Helix 7 depot had been completely destroyed, along with 6 months' worth of stored supplies and replacement equipment. More disturbing were the intelligence reports indicating that the attack had been carried out by a coordinated force of multiple species working under human leadership. The psychological impact was spreading throughout the Empire faster than the Caliph could contain it. Subject species that had been passive for centuries were beginning to ask questions about their status and treatment. Minor acts of sabotage were being reported from worlds that had been completely stable just months ago. The example of successful resistance was inspiring rebellion throughout Caliph space. Commander Thane brought more bad news when he arrived for the morning briefing. 3 more Caliph patrol vessels had disappeared in the past week, presumably destroyed by human raiding parties. Supply convoys were requiring larger escorts, which reduced the ships available for offensive operations. The cost of maintaining security was consuming resources that should have been used for expansion and development. The situation became critical when the rebellion spread to the core systems of the Caliph Empire. The planet Nexus Prime, which served as a major industrial center, experienced coordinated uprisings among its worker populations. Multiple species that had been integrated into Caliph society for generations suddenly began demanding independence and self-governance. The uprising was led by species that humans had never even contacted. The builders on Nexus Prime had been inspired by reports of their cousins joining the rebellion and decided to strike against their own overseers. The coordinated work stoppage brought industrial production to a halt and forced the Caliph to deploy military units to maintain order among their own citizens. Beth received updates about the spreading rebellion while planning her next operation. Her fleet had grown to include vessels from 12 different species, making it more powerful than some national navies had been before the war began. The mixed force represented something unprecedented in galactic history, a military alliance based on shared opposition to imperial rule rather than common species identity. The next target was a Caliph research facility on the moon of Titan Major, where alien scientists were studying captured human technology and trying to develop countermeasures. Intelligence reports indicated that the facility contained examples of every weapon system humans had used against the Empire, along with detailed analysis of human tactical doctrine. The attack on Titan Major required different tactics because the facility was heavily defended and located deep within Caliph space. Beth decided to use the one advantage her mixed fleet possessed that the Empire could not counter: the willingness to sacrifice valuable assets for strategic goals. The plan called for 3 ships to conduct a suicidal assault that would create enough chaos for the rest of the fleet to complete the mission. The volunteers came from all 3 major species in the Alliance: a builder drone ship, a seeker research vessel, and a human destroyer would approach the facility openly and engage its defenses while broadcasting false intelligence about the size and composition of the attacking force. Their sacrifice would allow the rest of the fleet to infiltrate the facility and steal the research data. Beth watched from the Phoenix as the 3 volunteer ships began their final approach to Titan Major. The facility's defenses activated immediately, concentrating all firepower on the obvious threats while scanning space for additional attackers. The 3 ships fought back desperately, causing enough damage to make their assault appear genuine while buying time for the infiltration. Team. The builder drone ship was the first to fall, its crystalline hull shattering under concentrated energy fire. The seeker research vessel lasted longer, using advanced shielding technology to absorb punishment while returning fire with precision. Weapons. The human destroyer went down fighting, launching every missile it carried before disappearing in a brilliant explosion. The sacrifice succeeded perfectly. While the facility's defenses were focused on destroying the obvious attackers, Beth led a small infiltration team through the facility's blind spots using captured Caliph technology to avoid detection. They penetrated the research complex and downloaded everything the Empire had learned about human capabilities and tactics. The intelligence coup provided data that would reshape the entire war. The Caliph research showed that human tactics were causing far more damage than anyone had realized. The Empire was spending enormous resources trying to counter weapons and strategies that humans developed faster than countermeasures could be deployed. The economic impact was becoming unsustainable. More importantly, the captured data revealed deep divisions within the Caliph High Command about how to proceed with the human war. Some leaders wanted to escalate to total extermination, while others advocated for negotiated withdrawal. The Empire was facing the same problem that had destroyed other galactic powers throughout history. The cost of conquest was exceeding the value of conquered territory. Beth transmitted the captured intelligence to Admiral Patricia Wells and General Krell simultaneously. The data reached both commanders within hours, giving them identical pictures of the strategic situation. The war had reached a turning point, where both sides understood the true cost of continued conflict. The rebellion was no longer just about human independence. It had become a galaxy-wide movement that threatened the entire foundation of the Caliph Empire. Subject species throughout Imperial space were beginning to understand that resistance was possible and that their overlords were not invincible. General Krell stared at the intelligence reports and realized that his empire faced an existential crisis. The human war had awakened something that the Caliph had never encountered in 3,000 years of expansion. The idea that conquest could be resisted successfully. That idea was spreading faster than it could be suppressed, inspiring rebellion on worlds that had been peaceful for centuries. The question was no longer whether the Caliph could defeat the human-led alliance, but whether the Empire could survive. The example that humans had set every day brought new reports of uprisings, sabotage, and resistance movements inspired by the success of species working together against Imperial rule. Beth received confirmation that her intelligence crew had reached human command when Admiral Patricia Wells sent new orders to all rebel forces. The coordinated offensive would begin in 72 hours, targeting every major Caliph installation simultaneously. The Empire would face attacks on dozens of fronts at once, stretching their forces beyond the breaking point. The final phase of the rebellion was about to begin, and the Caliph Empire would learn that some wars cannot be won through superior technology alone. Sometimes the strongest weapon is the simple refusal to surrender. Regardless of the odds or the cost, Elder Voss had ruled the Caliph Empire for 800 years and had never faced a decision that could determine the survival of his entire civilization. The council chamber aboard the Imperial flagship contained representatives from every major Caliph faction, and for the first time in centuries they were arguing openly about fundamental policy. The human war had achieved something that no previous enemy had managed. It had divided the Caliph against themselves. The holographic display showed the current strategic situation across 47 systems, where active rebellions were taking place. What had started as a simple colonial acquisition had become a galaxy-wide insurgency that threatened every aspect of Imperial rule. Red indicators marked worlds where subject species had risen in revolt. Blue indicators showed Caliph forces under attack or completely destroyed. The map looked like a virus spreading through the Empire's body. General Krell stood before the council with his uniform torn and his left arm in a medical support device. His flagship had been damaged in the latest human attack, and half of his fleet was either destroyed or undergoing repairs. He reported that the rebellion was consuming resources faster than the Empire could replace them, and the psychological impact was causing loyalty problems among previously reliable forces. Admiral Thane argued for immediate escalation to total warfare. His scarred face showed the cost of underestimating human determination, and his voice carried the anger of someone who had been humiliated by a supposedly inferior enemy. He demanded permission to use planet-killing weapons against every world that harbored rebels, regardless of how many loyal subjects would die in the process. The council erupted in heated debate as different factions presented their solutions. The military leaders wanted to crush the rebellion through overwhelming force. The economic advisors calculated that the cost of total war would bankrupt the empire within 5 years. The subject species representatives warned that genocide would trigger uprisings on worlds that were currently still loyal. Elder Voss listened to the arguments while studying intelligence reports that painted an increasingly grim picture. The humans had not only inspired rebellion among existing subject species, but they had also created something unprecedented, a military alliance based on shared opposition to imperial rule rather than common species identity. 12 different races were now fighting together under human leadership. The most disturbing report came from the core world of Caliph Prime itself, where the first anti-war demonstrations in imperial history had taken place. Young Caliph citizens were questioning the morality of conquest and asking why their government needed to rule over unwilling subjects. The concept of voluntary cooperation was spreading even among the ruling species. Commander Vel of the Reformed Seekers had been broadcasting his own version of events throughout Caliph space, using communication techniques that were impossible to jam or block. His messages described the rebellion as a liberation movement that offered freedom and self-determination to all species regardless of their current status. The idea was gaining support even among groups that had previously benefited from imperial expansion. Dr. Ann Miller's latest innovation had reached Elder Voss through intelligence channels that he found deeply troubling. The human scientist had developed a technique for converting Caliph terraforming equipment into weapons of mass destruction. Every peaceful colony ship in the Imperial fleet could now be turned into a planet-killing device by anyone with basic technical knowledge and access to human instruction manuals. The implications were staggering. The Caliph Empire controlled thousands of worlds through the threat of superior technology, but that same technology could now be turned against them by their own subjects. Every piece of equipment they had provided to subject species could potentially become a weapon in the hands of rebels who no longer feared imperial retaliation. Captain Refoster's tactical innovations had spread throughout the galaxy with disturbing speed. Species that had never fought wars before were using human-developed strategies to destroy Caliph installations with primitive but effective weapons. The Empire's technological advantage was being neutralized by enemies who refused to fight according to established rules of civilized warfare. The economic reports were equally dire. The cost of suppressing rebellions across dozens of systems was consuming the Empire's treasury faster than conquered worlds could replace it. Military expenditures had increased by 400% in the past year, while tax revenues were declining as productive worlds were destroyed or abandoned. The Empire was spending itself into bankruptcy trying to maintain control over increasingly worthless territory. Elder Voss called for silence and addressed the council with the weight of 8 centuries of leadership experience. He explained that the Caliph Empire faced a type of enemy they had never encountered before, one that could not be defeated through superior technology or overwhelming force. The humans had weaponized the concept of resistance itself, turning it into something that spread from species to species like a contagious disease. The Elder showed the council projections that demonstrated the ultimate futility of continued warfare. Even if they managed to exterminate humanity and all current rebel species, the idea of successful resistance would survive. Other species would eventually rediscover human tactics and innovations, leading to new rebellions that would be even harder to suppress. The Empire would face an endless cycle of increasingly costly wars against enemies who learned from each previous defeat. More troubling was the psychological impact on the Caliph themselves. The species that had conquered the galaxy through confident superiority was beginning to doubt its own righteousness. Young Caliph were asking questions about the morality of forcing other species to accept relocation and imperial rule. The foundation of their entire civilization was being undermined by ideas that humans had introduced through their stubborn refusal to surrender. Admiral Thane interrupted the Elder's analysis with an angry demand for decisive action. He argued that the Empire could still win through sufficient application of force, and that any compromise with rebels would be seen as weakness by subject species throughout the galaxy. The Admiral pulled up tactical displays showing the locations of every human colony and claimed that complete extermination was still possible if they acted quickly. Elder Voss considered the Admiral's proposal while studying casualty reports from the past 6 months of fighting. The Caliph had lost more ships and personnel than in the previous 50 years of expansion combined. The rebels were using suicide, tactics that resulted in favorable kill ratios despite their technological disadvantages. Most disturbing was the fact that every Caliph death seemed to inspire 10 new rebels to join the cause. The decisive moment came when Lieutenant Colonel Beth Rodriguez transmitted a message directly to the Imperial Council chamber. Her mixed-species fleet had positioned itself just outside Caliph Prime's defensive perimeter, demonstrating that the rebellion could strike at the heart of the Empire whenever it chose. Beth's message was simple and direct. The rebels were offering terms for ending the conflict. The terms were not what anyone in the council chamber had expected. The rebels were not demanding the dissolution of the Caliph Empire or reparations for damage caused during the war. Instead, they wanted recognition of the right to self-determination for all species, the establishment of voluntary rather than forced relationships between different civilizations, and the creation of neutral zones where species could coexist without imperial oversight. Beth explained that the rebellion was not about destroying the Caliph Empire, but about changing the fundamental basis of galactic civilization. The rebels wanted to replace conquest and forced relocation with voluntary cooperation and mutual benefit. Species could choose to join the Empire if it offered advantages, but they also had the right to remain independent or form their own alliances. The proposal included provisions for existing Caliph colonies and installations. Species that wanted to remain under imperial rule could do so, while those that preferred independence would be allowed to govern themselves. The rebels were offering to help establish new relationships based on trade and cooperation rather than domination and control. Elder Voss realized that the rebels were proposing something unprecedented in galactic history, a system where different species could coexist, without any single group exercising complete control over the others. The concept challenged every assumption about how civilization should be organized, but it also offered a way to end the increasingly costly war. The council debate continued for 18 hours while rebel fleets maintained their positions throughout Caliph space. The military factions argued for continued resistance, while the economic advisors calculated the long-term benefits of peace. The subject species representatives supported the rebel proposals, while traditional Caliph leaders worried about the precedent that negotiation would set. The final decision came when Elder Voss presented the council with classified intelligence about the true extent of the rebellion. Uprisings were taking place on 73 worlds, including 12 that were considered core territories of the Empire. The revolt had spread beyond anything they could suppress through military force alone, and the cost of total war would destroy the Empire even if they achieved complete victory. General Krell supported the Elder's assessment with brutal honesty about the military situation. His forces were outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and demoralized by an enemy that refused to fight according to predictable patterns. The humans had taught other species that resistance was possible, and that lesson could never be unlearned regardless of how many rebels were killed. The vote was closer than Elder Voss had expected, but the decision was made to accept the rebel terms and begin negotiating a new relationship between the Caliph Empire and the species it had previously ruled. Admiral Thane stormed out of the council chamber in protest, but he was in the minority among the leadership that remained. The ceasefire agreement was signed aboard Admiral Patricia Wells' flagship with representatives from 15 different species present as witnesses. Elder Voss himself attended the ceremony, making it clear that the Caliph Empire was committed to the new arrangement. The document established principles for voluntary association and mutual benefit that would reshape galactic civilization. Captain Ray Foster stood beside Beth Rodriguez as they watched the signing ceremony and reflected on how much had changed since the Caliph first arrived at New Haven Colony. What had started as a simple demand for relocation had become a war that transformed the fundamental nature of interstellar relationships. The galaxy would never again accept the idea that superior technology automatically granted the right to rule over others. Dr. Ann Miller received recognition for her contributions to the rebel cause, but she was more interested in the peaceful applications of the technology she had developed. The techniques that had been used to destroy Caliph ships could also be used to build better defenses and more efficient industrial systems. The war had accelerated technological development in ways that would benefit all species. The final scene took place 6 months after the ceasefire, when Elder Voss visited the rebuilt colony of New Haven to participate in the establishment of the First Galactic Cooperation Council. The organization would mediate disputes between species and facilitate voluntary trade and cultural exchange. It represented everything the rebels had fought to achieve, a galaxy where different civilizations could coexist as equals. Admiral Patricia Wells looked out at the mixed fleet of ships from dozens of species that now patrolled the neutral zones established by the peace agreement. The vessels represented something unprecedented in galactic history, a military force dedicated to protecting the right of species to choose their own destiny rather than expanding the territory of any single empire. The Caliph had wanted a colony and gotten a war. But the war had given them something more valuable than any conquered territory, the opportunity to be part of a civilization based on cooperation rather than domination. The galaxy was entering a new age where the strength of a species would be measured not by how many others it could conquer, but by how many others chose to work with it voluntarily. The aliens had learned that humans were too stubborn to know when they were beaten, and too creative in their resistance to make conquest practical. But more importantly, they had learned that some things were worth more than victory, the respect. That came from treating other species as equals rather than subjects.